Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had seen enough combat to last 3 lifetimes. The 32-year-old Navy SEAL had completed 4 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, earning multiple commendations for valor and an impressive collection of scars that told stories he preferred not to share. His weathered face carried the weight of countless missions, and his dark eyes held secrets that only fellow warriors would understand. On this particular morning in Camp Leatherneck, Afghanistan, Marcus sat alone in the medical tent, stubbornly refusing treatment for a deep shrapnel wound in his left shoulder. The explosion from the improvised explosive device had thrown him 15 feet, embedding metal fragments deep into his muscle tissue. Blood had soaked through his tactical vest, creating dark stains that he ignored with the same determination he brought to every mission. Dr. Sarah Chun, a skilled Navy surgeon who had been treating wounded soldiers for the past 8 months, approached Marcus with a mixture of professional concern and personal frustration. She had seen his type before, the hardened warriors who believed accepting medical help was somehow a sign of weakness. Her small frame and gentle demeanor often fooled people into thinking she was inexperienced, but her steady hands had saved more lives than most people twice her age. "Staff Sergeant, you need surgery," she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of medical training. "The shrapnel has damaged your rotator cuff, and if we don't remove it soon, you'll lose full mobility in that arm permanently." Marcus looked up at her with eyes that seemed to see right through her professional facade. He had learned long ago to read people quickly and accurately. It was a skill that had kept him alive in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between coming home or being shipped back in a flag-draped coffin. "Doc, I appreciate what you're trying to do," he said, his voice rough from years of shouting orders over gunfire and explosions. "But I've walked off worse than this. Give me some bandages and pain pills and I'll be fine." The tent flap opened, and Corporal Jake Morrison entered, carrying supplies for the medical team. Jake was Marcus's closest friend in the unit, a fellow SEAL who had saved Marcus's life twice, and had his own life saved by Marcus on 3 separate occasions. Their bond went beyond the typical brotherhood of military service. They had become family in the truest sense of the word. "Marcus, you stubborn fool," Jake said, setting down the supplies and crossing his arms. "You're being an idiot about this. Dr. Chin knows what she's talking about." Marcus shot him a look that could have melted steel. "Stay out of this, Jake. It's my body and my decision." The truth was that Marcus had developed a deep-seated fear of medical procedures after a traumatic experience during his second tour. He had been captured by enemy forces and tortured for 3 days before his team rescued him. Part of that torture had involved crude surgical procedures performed without anesthesia, designed to inflict maximum pain without killing him. The memory of being helpless on a makeshift operating table still haunted his dreams and made the thought of voluntary surgery unbearable. Dr. Chun studied Marcus's face, recognizing the signs of post-traumatic stress that she had seen in countless other patients. She had learned that pushing too hard often made these warriors retreat further into themselves, but she also knew that his injury required immediate attention. "Staff Sergeant," she said gently, "I understand your reluctance. Many of our patients have similar concerns, but I can assure you that our procedures are completely different from anything you might have experienced in the field. We have the best equipment, the cleanest facilities, and I'll personally ensure your comfort throughout the entire process." Marcus stood up abruptly, wincing as the movement sent sharp pain through his injured shoulder. "I said no, and I meant no. Find someone else to practice on. Document." As he moved toward the tent entrance, his injured shoulder gave out completely, and he stumbled forward. Jake caught him before he could fall, and both men could see the extent of blood loss that Marcus had been hiding. His face had turned pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "That's it, Dr. Chun said, her voice taking on a tone of medical authority that brooked no argument. "You're going into surgery whether you like it or not. Jake, help me get him to the operating room." Marcus tried to protest, but His body was betraying him. The combination of blood loss and shock was making it difficult to focus, and he found himself leaning heavily on Jake for support. As they moved through the camp toward the surgical facility, Marcus noticed the concerned looks from other soldiers and felt a familiar surge of embarrassment at showing weakness in front of his peers. The surgical facility at Camp Leatherneck was surprisingly well equipped for a forward operating base. Dr. Chun had worked tirelessly with the base commander to ensure that wounded soldiers received the best possible care, often using her own connections and resources to obtain equipment that wasn't officially provided. The operating room was clean, modern, and staffed by experienced medical professionals who had volunteered for deployment specifically to serve wounded warriors. As they prepared Marcus for surgery, Dr. Chun noticed his increasing agitation. His heart rate was elevated beyond what could be explained by his injury alone, and his breathing had become rapid and shallow. She recognized the signs of an approaching panic attack and knew that proceeding with surgery in his current mental state could be dangerous for everyone involved. "Staff Sergeant," she said, pulling up a chair beside his stretcher, "I want you to tell me what's really bothering you about this surgery. I've been doing this long enough to know when a patient's fear goes beyond normal preoperative anxiety." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to block out the fluorescent lights that reminded him too much of the makeshift torture chamber where he had been held captive. The smell of disinfectant triggered memories he had worked years to suppress, and he could feel his carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble. "You wouldn't understand," he said through gritted teeth. "You've never been captured, never been at the mercy of someone who enjoys causing pain." Dr. Chun nodded slowly, beginning to understand the depth of his trauma. "You're right, I haven't experienced what you have. But I have treated many soldiers who have been through similar ordeals. Would it help if I explained exactly what we're going to do, step by step, so there are no surprises?" For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Chin walked Marcus through every aspect of the surgical procedure, explaining each instrument, each medication, and each step of the process. She showed him the monitoring equipment that would track his vital signs, the anesthesia machine that would keep him comfortable, and the surgical tools that would be used to remove the shrapnel. Her calm, professional manner began to have a calming effect on Marcus, though he still felt the underlying current of fear running through his system. Jake remained at Marcus's side throughout the preparation, offering quiet words of encouragement and reminding him of all the dangerous situations they had survived together. Their friendship had been forged in the crucible of combat, and Jake understood better than anyone the internal battles that Marcus fought daily. As the anesthesiologist prepared to begin the procedure, Marcus grabbed Dr. Chin's arm with surprising strength. "Promise me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me that if something goes wrong, if I start to panic or fight, you won't let them hold me down like they did before." Dr. Chin looked into his eyes and saw the vulnerability that he worked so hard to hide from the world. "I promise, Staff Sergeant. If you become uncomfortable at any point, we'll stop immediately and find another way to help you. You have my word as both a doctor and a fellow service member." With that assurance, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax enough for the anesthesia to take effect. As consciousness faded, his last coherent thought was a prayer that he would wake up whole and free, not trapped in the nightmare memories that had haunted him for so many years. The surgery itself was more complicated than Dr. Chun had initially anticipated. The shrapnel had fragmented into dozens of smaller pieces, some of which had migrated dangerously close to major blood vessels and nerve clusters. Each piece had to be carefully located and removed without causing additional damage to the surrounding tissue. The procedure took nearly 4 hours, with Dr. Chun working meticulously to preserve as much function as possible in Marcus's shoulder. During the surgery, Jake waited in the medical tent, pacing nervously and checking his watch every few minutes. He had seen Marcus face down enemy fire without flinching, had watched him carry wounded teammates to safety under the most dangerous conditions imaginable, but he had never seen his friend as vulnerable as he had been that morning. The experience had shaken Jake more than he cared to admit, forcing him to confront his own fears about injury and mortality. Other members of their SEAL team began gathering in the waiting area as word spread about Marcus's surgery. These were men who had served together for years, who had shared dangers and hardships that most people couldn't imagine. Despite their reputation for being tough and emotionally distant, they genuinely cared about each other's welfare and considered Marcus to be one of their finest leaders. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, their unit's commanding officer, arrived just as Dr. Chun was completing the surgery. She was a career Navy officer who had earned the respect of her subordinates through her tactical brilliance and genuine concern for their welfare. Her presence in the medical facility sent a clear message that Marcus's well-being was a priority for the entire unit. "How's he doing, Jake?" she asked, settling into a chair beside him. "He's tougher than anyone I know," Jake replied, "but this whole thing really got to him. The doc says he's got some kind of trauma related to medical procedures. Something that happened during his second tour when he was captured." Commander Walsh nodded grimly. She had read Marcus's classified file and knew about the torture he had endured, though the specific details were known only to a handful of senior officers and the military psychologists who had worked with him during his recovery. The fact that he had continued to serve with distinction despite his psychological scars was a testament to his strength and dedication. When Dr. Chin finally emerged from the operating room, she looked tired but pleased with the results. "The surgery went very well," she announced to the assembled group. "We were able to remove all the shrapnel, and I expect him to make a full recovery. He's going to need several weeks of physical therapy, but there's no reason he shouldn't regain complete function of his shoulder." The relief in the room was palpable. Jake felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from his chest, and he could see similar expressions on the faces of his teammates. They had all seen too many good soldiers permanently disabled by injuries that should have been treatable, and the prospect of losing Marcus to something as preventable as delayed medical care had been weighing heavily on everyone's minds. As Marcus began to regain consciousness, Dr. Chin stayed close to monitor his response to the anesthesia and to reassure him if he experienced any confusion or panic upon waking. She had learned from experience that patients with trauma-related anxiety often needed extra support during the vulnerable period immediately following surgery. Marcus's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he seemed disoriented and frightened. Dr. Chun immediately moved to his side, speaking in a calm, reassuring voice. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you're in the medical facility at Camp Leatherneck. The surgery is over, and everything went perfectly. You're safe, and all your friends are here waiting to see you." As the fog of anesthesia cleared, Marcus gradually became aware of his surroundings. The fear that had gripped him before the surgery was gone, replaced by a profound sense of relief and gratitude. His shoulder felt different, not the constant grinding pain he had experienced since the explosion, but a clean, manageable discomfort that spoke of healing rather than ongoing damage. Jake appeared at his bedside, grinning with relief. "How are you feeling, you stubborn fool?" Marcus tried to smile, though the effort was still somewhat difficult. "Like I got hit by a truck," he said, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "But better than I've felt in weeks." Dr. Chun checked his vital signs and wound dressing, pleased to see that everything was progressing normally. "The surgery was a complete success," she told him. "All the shrapnel has been removed, and there was no permanent damage to your rotator cuff or surrounding nerves. You're going to need to take it easy for a few weeks while the tissue heals, but after that, you should be as good as new." As word spread that Marcus was awake and recovering well, other members of his team began filing into the recovery area to check on him. These visits meant more to Marcus than he could express, reminding him that he was part of something larger than himself, and that his well-being mattered to people who understood the unique challenges of military service. Commander Walsh was among the last to visit, bringing with her the news that Marcus would be recommended for a Purple Heart for his injuries, and that his actions during the mission that led to his wounding had been noted in the official report. More importantly, she assured him that his position in the unit would be waiting for him when he completed his recovery. "Take all the time you need to heal properly," she told him. "We need you at full strength, not limping around trying to prove how tough you are." As the day wore on and the effects of the anesthesia completely wore off, Marcus found himself reflecting on the events that had brought him to this point. He realized that his refusal to accept help hadn't been a sign of strength, but rather a form of self-imposed limitation that could have cost him his career and possibly his life. The experience had forced him to confront fears he had been carrying for years, and to acknowledge that even the strongest warriors sometimes needed support from others. Dr. Chun stopped by during her evening rounds to check on his progress and to discuss his recovery plan. She found him sitting up in bed, looking more alert and peaceful than she had seen him since his arrival. "How are you feeling about everything now?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Grateful," he said finally, "and maybe a little embarrassed about how I acted earlier. You were just trying to help, and I made your job harder than it needed to be." Dr. Chen shook her head. "Don't apologize for being human, Staff Sergeant. Fear is a natural response to trauma, and medical procedures can be especially difficult for people who have experienced torture or abuse. The important thing is that you eventually trusted us enough to let us help you." As night fell over Camp Leatherneck, Marcus lay in his hospital bed, listening to the familiar sounds of a military base settling into evening routine. Guard changes, equipment checks, the distant sound of helicopters returning from patrol. These sounds that had once seemed mundane now carried a deeper meaning. They represented the ongoing mission, the collective effort of thousands of service members working toward a common goal, and his own small but important place in that larger picture. The injury that had initially seemed like a setback had become something else entirely, an opportunity for growth, for healing, and for a deeper understanding of the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability. Marcus realized that accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather a form of wisdom, a recognition that even the strongest individuals sometimes needed support from others to overcome the challenges life presented. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of his recovery process, physical therapy sessions, and gradually increasing activity levels as his shoulder healed. But tonight, for the first time in years, Marcus Rodriguez felt truly at peace with himself and his place in the world. The road ahead would not be easy, but he no longer felt like he had to travel alone. 3 weeks into his recovery, Marcus Rodriguez had regained most of the mobility in his shoulder and was growing restless with the enforced inactivity. The physical therapy sessions with Dr. Chan had become routine, and while his body was healing well, his mind craved the structure and purpose that came with active duty. The medical tent had become his temporary home, but every day he watched through the windows as his teammates prepared for missions without him. On a humid Thursday morning in late September, the routine of Camp Leatherneck was shattered by the arrival of a convoy that had been ambushed just outside the base perimeter. The sound of approaching helicopters and emergency vehicles sent medical personnel scrambling to prepare for incoming casualties. Marcus, despite his injured status, immediately moved to help however he could, his instincts as a combat medic overriding any concern for his own recovery. The first helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust, its rotors still spinning as medics rushed forward with stretchers. The casualties from this attack were severe. 3 Marines had been killed instantly by a roadside bomb, and 5 others had sustained serious injuries that required immediate surgical attention. The medical facility, which had been operating at normal capacity just minutes before, suddenly became a scene of controlled chaos as doctors and nurses worked to save lives. Among the wounded was a young Marine who couldn't have been more than 19 years old. Lance Corporal Maria Santos had been deployed to Afghanistan for only 6 weeks, and this was her first serious combat experience. She had taken shrapnel to her legs and abdomen, and her face was pale with shock and blood loss. As the medics carried her stretcher past Marcus, he could see the fear in her dark eyes, the same terror he remembered feeling during his own first taste of combat violence. Dr. Chun was already in surgery with the most critically wounded soldier when Maria was brought into the medical facility. The base's other surgeon, Dr. Michael Thompson, was dealing with a Marine who had lost his right hand to the explosion. This left the medical staff shorthanded just when they needed every available person to save lives. Marcus watched as the medical team struggled to triage the wounded effectively. His shoulder protested as he moved, but years of training and instinct took over. Despite being officially on medical leave, he began assisting with basic medical procedures, using his combat medic training to stabilize patients while the doctors focused on the most critical cases. "Staff Sergeant, you shouldn't be doing this," said Corpsman Second Class Jennifer Liu, one of the Navy medics assigned to the facility. "You're still recovering from surgery." Marcus ignored her protest and continued working on a four-line for one of the wounded Marines. "These kids need help now," he said grimly. "My shoulder can wait." As he worked, Marcus noticed that Lance Corporal Santos was not receiving the attention she needed. Her wounds were serious, but not immediately life-threatening, which meant she was lower on the triage priority list. However, Marcus could see signs that her condition was deteriorating. Her blood pressure was dropping, and her skin was becoming increasingly pale and clammy. He moved to her stretcher and began a more thorough assessment of her injuries. The shrapnel wounds in her abdomen were deeper than the initial examination had indicated, and he suspected internal bleeding that could become critical if not addressed quickly. Her legs had multiple lacerations, some of which had severed small arteries that were continuing to bleed despite pressure bandages. "Hey there, Marine," Marcus said gently, making eye contact with Maria as he worked. "I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. You're going to be okay, but I need you to stay awake and talk to me. What's your name?" Maria's eyes focused on him with difficulty. "Lance Corporal Maria Santos," she whispered through lips that were becoming blue from blood loss. I can't feel my legs." Marcus continued his examination while speaking in a calm, reassuring voice. "That's normal after this kind of trauma. Santos, your body is dealing with shock right now, but feeling will come back as you heal." "Where are you from?" "East LA, she managed to say. "My mom, she told me not to join the Marines. Said it was too dangerous for a girl like me." "Well, your mom was probably right about the dangerous part," Marcus said with a slight smile. "But I bet she'd be proud to see how brave you're being right now. You're a real Marine, Santos. I can see it in your eyes." As Marcus worked to stabilize Maria's condition, he noticed something that made him pause. Pinned to her uniform, partially hidden by her tactical vest, was a small military insignia that he recognized, but couldn't quite place. It was clearly a unit patch, but not one from any regular Marine Corps unit that he was familiar with. The design was subtle, a stylized eagle with wings spread over what appeared to be a lightning bolt, all rendered in muted colors that would be barely visible unless someone was looking for it specifically. "Santos," he said quietly, "where did you serve before your deployment here?" Her eyes became more focused for a moment, as if the question had penetrated through the fog of shock and pain. I can't tell you that, Staff Sergeant. It's classified." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with his own injuries. The insignia, the way she had answered his question, her obvious youth despite having completed specialized training. All of these details were pointing towards something that shouldn't exist. According to everything he knew about Marine Corps organization, there was no classified unit that recruited 19-year-old Lance Corporals fresh out of basic training. He continued working on her wounds while his mind raced through possibilities. His own security clearance was high enough that he was familiar with most special operations units, both within the Navy SEALs and in other branches of the military. But this insignia was completely unfamiliar which suggested either a very new program or something operating at a level of classification beyond even his access. "Santos, listen to me carefully," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you really just a regular Marine? Or is there something else I should know about your background?" Maria's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment the pain seemed to recede as she focused entirely on his face. "Staff Sergeant, I can't discuss operational details. But if you need to know about my training, you should ask someone with the right clearance level." Before Marcus could respond, Dr. Thompson finished with his previous patient and hurried over to assess Maria's condition. His examination confirmed what Marcus had suspected. She was bleeding internally, and surgery was needed immediately to prevent her condition from becoming life-threatening. "We need to get her into the OR right now," Dr. Thompson announced. "Staff Sergeant, thank you for stabilizing her, but you really shouldn't be working with that shoulder injury." As the medical team prepared to move Maria to surgery, she grabbed Marcus's wrist with surprising strength. "Staff Sergeant," she whispered urgently, "if something happens to me, if I don't make it through surgery, you need to contact Colonel Patricia Williams at Quantico. Tell her that Falcon 7 sends her regards. She'll know what it means." Marcus stared at her in shock. Colonel Williams was someone he had heard of but never met, a legendary figure in Marine Corps Special Operations who was rumored to oversee programs so classified that their very existence was denied by official sources. The fact that a 19-year-old Lance Corporal was asking him to send a coded message to such a high-ranking officer suggested that Maria Santos was far more than she appeared to be. "Santos, who are you really?" he asked, but she had already been sedated for surgery and couldn't respond. As the medical team wheeled her into the operating room, Marcus found himself alone with more questions than answers. The insignia on her uniform, her cryptic references to classified assignments, and her connection to Colonel Williams all pointed toward the possibility that he had just encountered someone involved in a black operations program that operated outside normal military channels. The surgery to repair Maria's internal injuries took nearly 6 hours. Dr. Thompson worked meticulously to locate and seal the source of bleeding, while also repairing damage to her digestive tract caused by shrapnel fragments. The wounds to her legs required additional surgery to reconstruct damaged blood vessels and remove metal fragments that had penetrated deep into muscle tissue. During the long wait, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. He had served in special operations for over a decade and thought he was familiar with all the classified programs operating within the U.S. military. The possibility that there were units operating at levels of secrecy beyond even his knowledge was both fascinating and deeply troubling. Jake Morrison found Marcus in the medical tent's waiting area, staring out the window at the Afghan landscape beyond the base perimeter. "I heard you were playing doctor again today," Jake said, settling into a chair beside his friend. "How's the shoulder holding up?" "It's fine," Marcus replied absently. "Jake, have you ever heard of any Special Marine Corps units that recruit directly from basic training? Something that would give a 19-year-old Lance Corporal access to highly classified operations?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's an oddly specific question. Why do you ask?" Marcus described his encounter with Maria Santos, carefully avoiding any mention of the coded message she had asked him to deliver. Jake listened thoughtfully, his expression growing more serious as Marcus described the mysterious insignia and her references to classified assignments. "You know," Jake said finally, "there have been rumors for years about experimental programs within different branches of the military. Projects that recruit people based on psychological profiles rather than traditional military experience. But I always figured they were just rumors." "What kind of psychological profiles?" Marcus asked. "The kind that identify people who can handle extreme stress without breaking, who can maintain cover identities under pressure, who can make life-or-death decisions without hesitation. Basically, they're looking for people who have the mental makeup for deep cover operations, but haven't been shaped by years of traditional military training." Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand the logic behind such a program. Traditional special operations recruitment focused on candidates who had already proven themselves in conventional military roles. But that approach also meant working with people whose thinking patterns had been shaped by standard military doctrine. A program that identified candidates with natural aptitude for special operations work, then trained them from the beginning according to unconventional methods, could theoretically produce operators with capabilities that traditional programs couldn't match. But even if such programs exist, Jake continued, they would be operating at classification levels that most of us would never hear about. The kind of thing that requires presidential authorization and oversight by only a handful of senior officials. When Dr. Thompson finally emerged from the operating room, he looked exhausted but relieved. "She's going to make it," he announced. "The internal bleeding has been stopped, and we were able to repair all the damage to her digestive tract. The leg wounds were more complicated, but we managed to save all the major blood vessels and nerve clusters. She'll need months of physical therapy, but she should make a full recovery." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a renewed sense of curiosity about Maria's true background. If she was indeed involved in some kind of classified program, her recovery would likely mean a return to duties that most people would never know existed. As night fell over Camp Leatherneck, Marcus sat beside Maria's bed in the post-operative recovery area. She was still unconscious from the anesthesia, but her vital signs were stable and her color was slowly returning to normal. The mystery surrounding her identity continued to gnaw at him, and he found himself studying her face for clues about who she really was beneath the carefully constructed identity of a regular Marine Corps Lance Corporal. Dr. Chin stopped by during her evening rounds to check on Maria's progress and to assess Marcus's own condition. She had noticed his increased activity level during the crisis earlier that day and was concerned that he might be pushing his recovery too hard. "How's the shoulder feeling after today's excitement?" she asked, gently examining the surgical site. "Better than it has in weeks," Marcus replied honestly. "I think having something useful to do helped more than any medication could." Dr. Chin nodded approvingly. "Activity is good for healing, as long as you don't overdo it. But I want you to remember that recovery is a process, not a destination. Your body needs time to rebuild strength, even if your mind is ready to get back to full duty." As they talked, Maria began to show signs of waking up. Her eyelids fluttered, and she made small sounds that indicated she was fighting her way back to consciousness. Marcus moved closer to her bedside, ready to provide reassurance if she experienced the confusion and disorientation that often accompanied recovery from major surgery. When Maria's eyes finally opened, they immediately focused on Marcus with an intensity that surprised him. Despite having just undergone hours of surgery, she seemed alert and aware of her surroundings in a way that most patients didn't achieve for hours or even days after such procedures. "Staff Sergeant," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "Did you deliver my message?" Marcus glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then leaned closer to her bed. "Not yet. I wanted to make sure you were going to be okay first. Santos, I need you to tell me what's really going on. Who are you? And why are you asking me to contact Colonel Williams?" Maria studied his face for a long moment, as if evaluating how much she could safely reveal. "Staff Sergeant, I can't tell you everything, but I can tell you that my presence here isn't accidental, and neither was the attack on our convoy today. There are things happening in this region that go beyond the official mission parameters, and some people don't want those things to be discovered." Before Marcus could ask for clarification, Commander Walsh appeared in the recovery area. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had urgent business to conduct, and her expression suggested that whatever had brought her here was a matter of significant importance. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said formally, "I need to speak with you privately. It's a matter of operational security." Marcus looked back at Maria, who had closed her eyes and appeared to be sleeping again. But something in her stillness suggested that she was listening carefully to everything being said around her. "Of course, Commander," Marcus replied, following Walsh out of the recovery area and into a small office that served as a private consultation room. Commander Walsh closed the door and activated a small electronic device that Marcus recognized as a bug detector and signal jammer, standard equipment for discussions involving classified material. The fact that she felt such precautions were necessary suggested that their conversation would involve information at the highest levels of military classification. Marcus, she said, dropping the formal tone and using his first name, I've received some very interesting communications today. It seems that our young Lance Corporal Santos isn't exactly who she appears to be, and her presence at this base has attracted attention from some very senior people. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What kind of attention, Commander? The kind that involves direct communication from the Pentagon and questions about operational security that I'm not equipped to answer, Walsh replied grimly. Marcus, I need you to tell me everything about your interaction with Santos today, including anything she might have said about her background or her mission here. Marcus found himself in an extremely difficult position. Military protocol demanded complete honesty with his commanding officer, but he had also given Maria his implicit promise to protect whatever secrets she was carrying. The coded message she had asked him to deliver suggested that she was operating under orders from authorities that might outrank even Commander Walsh. Commander, he said carefully, Santos was seriously injured and said a lot of things while she was in shock. Some of it might have been delirium from blood loss. I'm not sure how much weight to give to anything she said during those first few minutes. Commander Walsh studied his face with the keen perception that had made her such an effective officer. Marcus, I've known you for 3 years, and I've never known you to be evasive about operational matters. Whatever Santos told you, it was important enough to make you protective of her secrets. I need to know what we're dealing with here. Marcus realized that he was going to have to make a decision that could affect not only his own career, but potentially the lives of everyone involved in whatever operation Maria Santos represented. The safest course would be to reveal everything he knew and let his superiors handle the consequences. But his instincts told him that there were larger forces at work here, and that Maria's safety might depend on maintaining the secrecy she had requested. Commander, he said finally, Santos asked me to contact someone at Quantico if she didn't survive surgery. She said to tell Colonel Patricia Williams that Falcon 7 sends her regards. I don't know what it means, but she seemed to think it was important. Commander Walsh's expression changed immediately. The casual concern was replaced by something much more serious. A recognition that suggested she was familiar with the name Colonel Williams and understood the significance of the coded message. Marcus, she said quietly, I want you to make that call tonight. Use the secure communication system in my office, and make sure no one else is around when you do it. This conversation never happened, and you're not to discuss any of this with anyone else, including Jake Morrison. Do you understand? Yes, Commander, Marcus replied, though he was more confused than ever about what was happening around him. As they prepared to leave the office, Commander Walsh placed a hand on his shoulder. Marcus, I want you to know that your actions today probably saved Santos's life. Whatever she's really involved in, she's lucky to have someone like you looking out for her. But from this point forward, you need to be very careful about how much you involve yourself in her situation. There are people who might see your knowledge as a security risk. Marcus nodded, understanding the warning implicit in her words. He was walking into territory where the normal rules of military service might not apply, where loyalty and duty could be measured by different standards than those he had learned during his years of conventional operations. As he made his way back to the recovery area to check on Maria one last time before making the call to Colonel Williams, Marcus reflected on how drastically his life had changed in just one day. This morning, he had been a wounded SEAL focused on his own recovery. Tonight, he was apparently involved in some kind of classified operation that reached into the highest levels of military command. Maria Santos was awake when he returned, and her eyes tracked his movement with the alertness of someone who was accustomed to gathering intelligence from minimal visual cues. Despite her injuries and recent surgery, she radiated a sense of competence and awareness that was far beyond what he would expect from a 19-year-old Marine with only 6 weeks of deployment experience. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly as he approached her bed, "thank you for everything you did today. I know this situation is confusing, but I want you to know that your help might have saved more than just my life." "Santos," Marcus replied, "I'm going to make that call tonight. But before I do, I need you to tell me one thing honestly. Are you really 19 years old?" Maria smiled for the first time since he had met her, and in that smile Marcus caught a glimpse of the person she really was beneath the carefully constructed cover identity. "Staff Sergeant, age is just a number. What matters is what someone has experienced, not how long they've been alive." As Marcus prepared to leave the medical facility and make the most important phone call of his military career, he realized that Maria Santos had just confirmed his suspicions without actually answering his question. Tomorrow would bring new revelations and new complications, but tonight he had a job to do that might change everything he thought he knew about the nature of military service in the modern world. The secure communication facility at Camp Leatherneck was located in a reinforced bunker beneath the base's command center. Marcus had used these systems before for routine operational communications, but tonight felt different. The weight of the coded message from Maria Santos, combined with Commander Walsh's obvious concern, suggested that he was about to initiate contact with elements of the military establishment that operated far beyond his normal sphere of experience. The duty communications officer, Sergeant First Class David Kim, was a seasoned veteran who had handled classified communications for over 8 years. He had seen enough sensitive material pass through his equipment to know when something was particularly important, and Marcus's request for a priority, secure line to Marine Corps headquarters at Quantico immediately caught his attention. "Staff Sergeant, this is going to be a direct line to some pretty high-level people," Kim said as he established the encrypted connection. "Are you sure you have authorization for this level of communication?" Marcus showed him the written authorization from Commander Walsh, which included her personal authentication codes and a priority classification that Kim had rarely seen used. "I'm as sure as I can be, Sergeant. This call is related to operational security at the highest levels." The connection took several minutes to establish, routing through multiple layers of encryption and authentication protocols designed to ensure that sensitive information couldn't be intercepted or traced. When the line finally connected, Marcus found himself speaking to a duty officer at Marine Corps headquarters who seemed to be expecting his call. "This is Major Reynolds at Quantico," came the crisp voice through the encrypted connection. "I understand you have a message for Colonel Williams regarding an operational matter in Afghanistan." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, following the formal protocol for classified communications. "I have been asked to relay a coded message from Lance Corporal Maria Santos, currently assigned to operations in the Helmand province. The message is, Falcon 7 sends her regards." There was a long pause on the line, during which Marcus could hear the sound of computer keyboards and muffled conversations in the background. When Major Reynolds spoke again, his tone had changed completely. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I need to ask you some specific questions about your interaction with Lance Corporal Santos. This information is classified at the highest levels, and your answers will be recorded for security purposes. Do you consent to this interview?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever he had stumbled into was clearly more significant than he had imagined. "Yes, sir. I consent to the interview." For the next 20 minutes, Major Reynolds asked detailed questions about every aspect of Marcus's encounter with Maria Santos. Her injuries, her behavior during medical treatment, any unusual equipment or documentation she might have been carrying, and, most importantly, the exact circumstances under which she had given him the coded message. Marcus answered as accurately as possible, though he was careful not to speculate about information he wasn't certain of. "Staff Sergeant," Major Reynolds said finally, "Colonel Williams will want to speak with you directly. Please remain on this line while I transfer you to her secure office." The transfer took another few minutes, during which Marcus found himself wondering what he had gotten himself into. Colonel Patricia Williams was a figure of legend within Marine Corps Special Operations, a woman who had risen through the ranks during an era when female Marines faced significant barriers to advancement, and who is rumored to oversee programs that push the boundaries of conventional military doctrine. When Colonel Williams came on the line, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected global security operations. But there was also a warmth in her tone that suggested genuine concern for the welfare of the people under her command. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I want to thank you for your quick thinking and medical expertise today. Lance Corporal Santos is a very valuable asset, and your actions may have prevented a significant security compromise in addition to saving her life. Thank you, Colonel, Marcus replied. But I have to admit, I'm confused about what exactly I've gotten involved in. Santos isn't really just a regular Marine, is she? Colonel Williams paused before answering, and Marcus could sense her carefully weighing how much information she could safely share. Staff Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the Special Access Program level. You will be required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements, and this information can never be shared with anyone who doesn't already have authorized access. Do you understand the seriousness of what I'm saying? Yes, ma'am. I understand completely. Lance Corporal Santos is part of an experimental program called Operation Nightingale. We recruit individuals who demonstrate exceptional psychological resilience and analytical capabilities, regardless of their age or traditional military experience. These individuals are given intensive training in deep cover operations, advanced combat techniques, and intelligence gathering methods that go far beyond what conventional units receive. Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. So she's not really 19 years old? Actually, she is 19, Colonel Williams replied, surprising him. That's part of what makes her so effective. Enemy forces expect intelligence operatives to be older, more experienced. They don't suspect that a teenage Marine might be gathering information about their operations or conducting surveillance on their activities. Maria Santos has been operating in Afghanistan for 6 months under various cover identities, and her intelligence reports have been instrumental in preventing several major terrorist attacks. The implications of what Colonel Williams was telling him were staggering. Maria Santos was essentially a teenage spy, operating in one of the most dangerous regions in the world, gathering intelligence that could affect the outcome of the entire Afghanistan conflict. The convoy attack that had nearly killed her suddenly took on a completely different meaning. Colonel, Marcus said carefully, was today's attack specifically targeting Santos? We believe so. Maria had recently identified a major weapons smuggling operation that was being conducted through seemingly legitimate civilian supply convoys. Her intelligence suggested that corrupt Afghan government officials were involved, and that the operation was being protected by people with access to information about American patrol schedules and convoy routes. Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. The idea that Maria Santos had been deliberately targeted by people who should have been allies was deeply disturbing. It also explained why her injuries had been so severe. The attackers hadn't been trying to simply disable the convoy. They had been trying to kill everyone involved to prevent the intelligence from reaching American command. Colonel, what can I do to help? Santos is still recovering from surgery, but if there's a threat to her safety, she shouldn't be left unprotected. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you directly, Staff Sergeant. Based on your service record and security clearance level, I'm authorizing you to serve as Santos' security liaison during her recovery period. Officially, you'll be helping with her medical rehabilitation. Unofficially, you'll be ensuring that no one gets close enough to finish what the convoy attack started. Marcus realized that his life was about to change dramatically. What about my own medical status? I'm still recovering from shoulder surgery myself. Dr. Chun has already been briefed on the new arrangements. Your rehabilitation will continue, but you'll also be assigned to light duty that will allow you to maintain visual contact with Santos at all times. Commander Walsh has been instructed to provide whatever support you need, though she doesn't have access to the full details of the operation. As the call continued, Colonel Williams provided Marcus with additional background information about Operation Nightingale and the specific mission that Maria Santos had been conducting. The program represented a radical departure from traditional intelligence gathering methods, utilizing operators who could blend into civilian populations in ways that conventional soldiers and spies could not. The psychological profile for Nightingale operatives is very specific, Colonel Williams explained. We're looking for individuals who can maintain multiple identities without losing their core sense of self, who can make life or death decisions without hesitation, but who can also maintain genuine emotional connections with the people around them. Maria Santos scored in the top 1% of candidates we've ever tested. Marcus found himself developing a deep respect for Maria's capabilities and achievements. To operate successfully in such a demanding role at her age required not just intelligence and training, but exceptional strength of character. The fact that she had trusted him with her coded message suggested that she had quickly and accurately assessed his own reliability and discretion. "Colonel," he said, "when Santos wakes up tomorrow, how much of this should I tell her about what we've discussed?" "Everything," Colonel Williams replied without hesitation. One of the principles of Operation Nightingale is complete honesty between team members. Maria will need to know that you're now part of her security detail, and she'll need to trust you completely if this arrangement is going to work. Her survival may depend on your ability to work together effectively. After concluding the call with Colonel Williams, Marcus remained in the communications bunker for several minutes, trying to process everything he had learned. His decision to help an injured Marine had suddenly evolved into involvement with one of the most classified programs in the U.S. military. The responsibility was both exciting and daunting. Sergeant Kim, who had been monitoring the technical aspects of the call without access to its content, noticed Marcus's contemplative mood. "Heavy conversation, Staff Sergeant?" "Something like that," Marcus replied. "Kim, this call never happened. The logs should reflect routine administrative communication, nothing more." Kim nodded understanding. He had handled enough classified communications to know when operational security required creative record-keeping. "Understood, Staff Sergeant. As far as I'm concerned, you were never here tonight." Marcus returned to the medical facility to find Maria Santos sitting up in her bed, looking alert despite having undergone major surgery just hours earlier. Her rapid recovery was another indication of the exceptional physical conditioning that Operation Nightingale required of its operatives. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly as he approached her bed, "I take it your conversation with Colonel Williams was informative?" "Very," Marcus replied, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "It seems my job description just expanded significantly. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but I felt worse," Maria said with a slight smile. "More importantly, how do you feel about being assigned to babysit a teenage spy?" Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of the uncertainty or vulnerability that might be expected from someone her age. Instead, he saw the calm confidence of a professional who was completely comfortable with her role and capabilities. "Honestly, I am impressed. What you've been doing out there takes more courage than anything I've experienced in 10 years of special operations. I'm honored to be part of your team." Maria's expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of the 19-year-old beneath the professional facade. "Thank you for saying that. Most people have trouble accepting that someone my age can handle this kind of work. They see the young face and assume I'm not capable of serious responsibility. Your age is actually an advantage in this environment," Marcus observed. "People make assumptions about teenagers that work in your favor, but that also means you're carrying a heavier burden than most people your age should have to handle." Over the next hour, Maria provided Marcus with additional details about her mission and the intelligence she had been gathering. The weapons smuggling operation she had uncovered was far more extensive than he had initially realized, involving not just corrupt Afghan officials, but also elements within the American military structure that were supposed to be providing security for the region. "The convoy attack wasn't random," Maria explained. "Someone with access to our patrol schedules and communication frequencies provided the attackers with specific information about our route and timing. They knew I was in that vehicle, and they knew I was carrying intelligence that could expose their operation. Marcus felt the anger building again as he realized the full scope of the betrayal. Do you know who provided the information? I have suspicions, but no concrete proof yet. That's why my recovery period here is actually an opportunity. Being stuck in a medical facility gives me a legitimate reason to observe base operations without arousing suspicion. People will assume I'm just a bored young Marine trying to entertain herself during a boring recovery period. As they talked, Marcus gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of Maria's situation. She was simultaneously a highly trained intelligence operative, a vulnerable teenage girl recovering from serious injuries, and a key witness to a corruption scandal that could reach into the highest levels of military command. Protecting her would require not just physical security, but careful management of the information she possessed. Dr. Chun made her final rounds of the evening, checking on Maria's surgical sites and adjusting her pain medication. She had been briefed about the new security arrangements, but had been told only that Maria was involved in classified operations that required special protection during her recovery period. "How's the pain level?" Dr. Chen asked as she examined the surgical dressings. "Manageable," Maria replied. "How long before I can start moving around normally?" "Your abdominal surgery was extensive, so you'll need to take it easy for at least 2 weeks. But I want you walking short distances starting tomorrow, and we can gradually increase your activity level as the healing progresses. The leg wounds are healing well, so mobility shouldn't be a long-term problem." After Dr. Chen left, Marcus and Maria continued their conversation about the security arrangements and the investigation into the convoy attack. Maria had already begun analyzing the available information about base personnel who had access to patrol schedules, and she had identified several individuals who warranted closer scrutiny. "The challenge," she explained, "is conducting surveillance on people without making them aware they're being watched. Base security cameras can be helpful, but they don't cover all areas, and the footage can be accessed by the same people we're investigating." Marcus nodded, understanding the problem. "What about using your recovery period as cover for gathering information? People expect patients to be curious about what's happening around them. You could ask innocent questions about base operations without seeming suspicious." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Maria replied with approval. "Medical personnel, maintenance workers, communication staff. They all have access to different types of information that could help identify who's been providing intelligence to enemy forces." As the night wore on, Marcus found himself impressed not just by Maria's intelligence and professionalism, but by her resilience and determination. Despite being seriously injured in an attack that was specifically targeting her, she was already focused on completing her mission and protecting other American service members from similar betrayals. "Maria," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I want you to know that whatever it takes to keep you safe and help you complete your mission, I'm committed to providing it. You're doing important work, and you shouldn't have to do it alone." Maria's expression showed genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus. I've been operating alone for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it feels like to have someone watching my back. It means more than you know." The next morning brought new challenges and opportunities. Maria's presence in the medical facility provided her with a perfect vantage point for observing base operations, and her apparent status as a recovering patient meant that people were less guarded around her than they might otherwise have been. Commander Walsh visited during morning rounds, ostensibly to check on Maria's recovery, but actually to receive a briefing on the security situation. She had been given limited information about Operation Nightingale, but understood that Maria's safety was crucial to ongoing operations. "Lance Corporal," Commander Walsh said formally, "I understand you'll be remaining in the medical facility for several more days while you recover. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will be coordinating any special requirements you might have during this period." "Thank you, Commander," Maria replied, playing her role as a grateful young Marine. "I appreciate everyone's concern for my welfare." As Commander Walsh prepared to leave, She made eye contact with Marcus in a way that conveyed her understanding of the serious nature of their assignment. The safety of a teenage intelligence operative was now a shared responsibility that could affect operations far beyond their small base in Afghanistan. Over the following days, Marcus and Maria worked together to gather information about the corruption network that had been exposed by her intelligence gathering. Their investigation revealed connections that reached into multiple levels of base operations, suggesting a conspiracy that had been developing over many months. It's not just one or two corrupt individuals, Maria explained during one of their evening briefings. This is a systematic compromise of security that involves people in communications, logistics, and operational planning. They've been selling information about American operations to the highest bidder. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, but it also provided opportunities for counterintelligence operations that could neutralize the threat and protect other American service members. Marcus found himself drawn into a type of warfare that was more complex and sophisticated than anything he had experienced in conventional combat operations. As Maria's physical recovery progressed, her investigation began to yield concrete results. Security camera footage, communication logs, and personnel records were revealing patterns that pointed towards specific individuals who had been providing classified information to enemy forces. The evidence was building toward a moment when action would need to be taken to prevent further compromises of American operations. "We're close to identifying the primary sources," Maria told Marcus during one of their planning sessions. "But we need to be careful about how we proceed. If they realize they're being investigated, they could destroy evidence or escalate their activities in ways that could cost lives." Marcus understood the delicate balance required for this type of operation. They needed to gather enough evidence to ensure successful prosecution while avoiding any actions that might tip off the conspirators before law enforcement could move against them. The breakthrough came when Maria identified a pattern in communication logs that revealed how classified information was being transmitted to enemy contacts. The method was sophisticated and had been designed to appear like routine administrative communications, but her analytical training allowed her to recognize the subtle patterns that revealed its true purpose. "This is it," she said, showing Marcus the evidence she had compiled. "We have enough information to identify the entire network and provide law enforcement with everything they need for successful prosecutions." As they prepared to transmit their findings to Colonel Williams and other appropriate authorities, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he had first encountered Maria Santos as a wounded Marine in need of medical assistance. Their partnership had evolved into something that transcended traditional military relationships, combining elements of mentorship, protection, and genuine friendship. "Maria," he said as they completed their final intelligence report, "I want you to know that working with you has changed how I think about military service and what it means to serve your country. You've shown me that courage comes in many different forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who never get public recognition for their sacrifices." Maria's response showed the emotional maturity that had made her successful in such a demanding role. "Marcus, you saved my life, and then helped me complete a mission that will save other lives. That's what military service is really about, taking care of each other and working together to protect something larger than ourselves." As their assignment together drew to a close, and Maria prepared to return to her covert operations, Marcus knew that their friendship would continue beyond this specific mission. They had formed the kind of bond that develops between people who have shared danger and worked together toward a common goal that transcends personal interests. The corrupt officials who had betrayed American operations were eventually arrested and prosecuted, and the weapons smuggling network that Maria had uncovered was completely dismantled. Her intelligence work prevented numerous attacks and saved countless lives, though her contributions would never be publicly acknowledged due to the classified nature of Operation Nightingale. For Marcus, the experience represented a turning point in his military career. His involvement with Maria's mission led to new assignments in intelligence and counterterrorism operations, where his combination of combat experience and analytical skills made him particularly valuable. He continued to serve with distinction, carrying forward the lessons he had learned about courage, sacrifice, and the complex nature of modern warfare. Years later, when Marcus looked back on his time in Afghanistan, he would remember not just the conventional combat operations and traditional military achievements, but the young Marine who had taught him that heroism often comes in unexpected forms and that some of the most important victories are won by people whose names never appear in official histories.